If loving a human is treason, then let the galaxy call me a traitor. The words had not yet been spoken, but they hung in the air like static before a storm as Ethan Cole stood at the center of the royal concourse, palms open, wrists circled by bands of pale light that hummed softly against his skin. The platform beneath his boots vibrated with low-frequency power, steady as a heartbeat, rising through polished crystal that stretched nearly 100 yards across. Above him, 2 moons burned silver in a violet sky, their light refracting through the domed shield overhead and spilling across the assembled court in fractured halos. He could smell ionized air and cold metal. Ozone. Distance. He was 5 feet 11 inches of very ordinary human, grease still faint beneath his fingernails from a 12-hour maintenance shift, standing in a place built for beings who measured life in centuries. A mile of alien citizens filled the terraces in layered arcs, robes shimmering in bioluminescent blues and golds, their whispers traveling like wind through dry leaves. At the highest tier stood Queen Seraphine Valeth, motionless, her crown a lattice of living crystal that glowed with restrained power. To her right, 3 paces away, stood Princess Lyra Valeth. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at her mother. She looked at him. Her skin held that quiet blue radiance, like deep ocean water lit from beneath, and her eyes, wide, unblinking, reflected his small, stubborn figure as if he were something rare. Ethan swallowed, the sound loud in his own ears. He had been told he was here for formal clarification. He had not expected a ceremonial gathering that spanned the width of a football field. He had not expected silence, so complete it felt engineered. A column of light descended beside him, projecting symbols he could not read, ancient script cascading in precise lines. He caught only one translated phrase on the hovering display: corruption of royal continuity. His breath fogged faintly in the chilled air. 36 hours ago, he had been in the lower decks, replacing a cracked coolant manifold, when royal guards had approached. 36 hours ago, he had still believed that refusing a bribe and fixing things properly was enough to keep life simple. Now the galaxy was watching. Lyra took one step forward. The movement was small, barely 3 feet, but it shifted the entire atmosphere. Her voice, when it came, was steady. He stands because I chose him. A ripple moved through the terraces. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. He had told her not to say that. He had told her choice should never cost a world its balance. The bands around his wrists tightened, not painfully, just enough to remind him he was measured, assessed, categorized. He lifted his chin anyway. He would not kneel unless he chose to. Above, the queen's gaze lowered, ancient and unreadable. The hum beneath the platform deepened. And in that suspended moment, between decree and defiance, between empire and a mechanic from Earth, the question was no longer why a princess wanted a human. The question was whether a civilization built on power could survive a single act of human decency. The silence did not break all at once. It thinned, like frost surrendering to sunlight, until the whispers returned in careful waves across the terraces. Ethan felt them move over his skin, not words he could understand, but judgment all the same. The light around his wrists dimmed slightly, adjusting to his pulse, mapping him as if he were a specimen instead of a man. He kept his shoulders square. If this was how an empire measured worth, then he would give it something honest to measure. Princess Lyra did not step back to her place beside the throne. She remained 3 feet from him, close enough that he could feel a faint warmth radiating from her bioluminescent skin despite the chamber's controlled 58-degree air. Her presence was steady, not trembling, not uncertain. She had made her declaration and did not retract it. Queen Seraphine descended the first tier of crystal steps, each footfall soundless, yet somehow heavier than gravity. The crown above her brow shifted with subtle internal light, reacting to her neural signals, a living interface between ruler and state. When she stopped 10 yards from Ethan, the hum beneath the platform softened to a low, attentive tone. Human, the queen said, her voice amplified not by volume, but by resonance, carried through the architecture itself. Did you solicit this selection? Ethan inhaled slowly. The air tasted faintly metallic, like rain before it fell. No, Your Majesty, he answered. He forced each word to remain steady. I did not. A ripple of translated text flashed above him. In pale gold, confirming the accuracy of his statement. He felt the court studying that glow more than his face. Truth here was not a philosophy. It was a measurable frequency. Lyra turned her head slightly toward her mother. He does not seek advantage, she said. He refused it when it was offered. Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He remembered that moment in the lower decks, a Valari noble pressing a credit chip into his hand for rushing a repair. He had handed it back. Regulations were regulations. The cooling system either functioned correctly or it did not. Lives depended on precision, not favors. He had not known the princess was watching from the upper observation glass, disguised in civilian attire, studying how a human behaved when no one important was looking. The queen's gaze sharpened, ancient and analytical. You are aware, she continued, that acceptance of royal bond alters geopolitical equilibrium across 12 sectors. Ethan almost laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. 12 sectors. He still rented a 300-square-foot berth on the station and measured groceries in ounces. With respect, Your Majesty, he said carefully, I did not ask for any of this. I fix what is broken. That is all. The translation glyphs shimmered again. No deception detected. Lyra's eyes brightened, a subtle increase in luminosity that cast faint blue light across Ethan's sleeve. The court noticed. They noticed everything. A murmur built along the terraces, not outrage now, but something more complicated. Calculation. The queen studied him for a long moment that felt like standing at the edge of a canyon, waiting to hear if your voice would echo back. Then the question, she said at last, is not what you desire, human. It is whether my daughter's choice reveals weakness. Lyra lifted her chin. It reveals discernment. Ethan felt the weight of that word settle over the chamber. Discernment. Not rebellion. Not infatuation. Choice. The platform beneath him pulsed once, a soft wave of light traveling outward in a perfect circle, as if the empire itself were considering a possibility it had never computed before. The pulse of light faded, but its implication lingered in the vaulted air like a question no one wanted to answer first. Ethan felt the platform steady beneath his boots, the faint vibration syncing with the measured rhythm of his heart. He kept his eyes forward, though every instinct told him to look at Lyra, to search her expression for doubt. He found none. Her posture remained upright, shoulders back, chin lifted in a way that was not defiance but certainty. Around them, the terraces shifted in hue as thousands of Valari adjusted their bioluminescent patterns, blues deepening into contemplative indigo. The Empire was thinking. Queen Seraphine extended one slender hand, and the hovering glyphs above Ethan dissolved into a thin ring of light that circled the platform's edge. Discernment. The queen repeated, tasting the word as if it were unfamiliar. You claim your selection strengthens the throne rather than diminishes it. Lyra stepped closer to Ethan until only a foot separated them. The warmth from her skin brushed against the chill air that clung to him. Yes, mother, she said. Power that fears integrity is already fragile. A faint intake of breath rippled across the chamber. Ethan felt the weight of that statement more than anyone. He had never imagined his habit of following maintenance codes and returning unearned credits could be reframed as integrity on an imperial scale. He shifted his stance slightly, the soft glow at his wrists adjusting to the movement. Your Majesty, he said carefully, choosing each word with the precision he used when calibrating a reactor coil. I do not understand your politics. I understand systems. If something is built on pressure alone, it cracks. If it is built on trust, it holds. The translation field shimmered again. No distortion. No hesitation. The queen's gaze narrowed, not in anger, but in evaluation. 10 yards away, she studied the human who spoke of empires the way he might speak of engine housings. And you believe, she asked, that my empire lacks trust? The air grew still, held at a precise temperature, as if even the climate controls awaited his response. Ethan shook his head once. I believe your empire does not yet know what humanity offers. He did not raise his voice. He did not kneel. He simply stood there, 5 feet 11 inches of unenhanced human resolve beneath 2 alien moons projected through a crystalline dome. Lyra's eyes brightened again, casting a soft halo across his shoulder. She turned slightly toward the terraces. He was tested, she said. He was unaware of the test. He chose fairness when exploitation would have been easier. He chose procedure. when shortcuts would have gone unnoticed. He chose responsibility without audience. A low murmur moved outward like wind across tall grass. The queen descended another step. Now only 6 yards separated ruler and mechanic. The living crown above her brow glowed brighter, interfacing with unseen councils, processing probabilities measured in entire star systems. Finally, she stopped. The hum beneath the platform quieted to near silence. "Then we shall test the greater variable," she declared. "Not the human, not my daughter, but the Empire." The ring of light at the platform's edge expanded slowly, dissolving the restraints around Ethan's wrists into harmless sparks that faded before touching the floor. The crowd inhaled as one. Ethan lowered his hands, free now, though nothing about the moment felt simple. Across from him, Lyra allowed herself the smallest exhale. The decision was not complete, but something had shifted, and for the first time since stepping onto that platform, Ethan felt that he was not standing alone against the galaxy. He was standing as part of a question it could no longer ignore. The restraints dissolved into fading sparks, and the absence of pressure around Ethan's wrists felt heavier than the bands themselves. He flexed his fingers slowly, as if confirming that freedom was real and not another layer of imperial theater. The ring of light at the platform's edge dimmed to a soft outline, no longer a boundary, but a threshold. Across the vast concourse, thousands of Volari watched without speaking, their luminous skin shifting in synchronized gradients that revealed unease, curiosity, calculation. The Empire had been given a problem it could not solve with force or decree. Queen Seraphine remained 6 yards away, her living crown glowing with restrained intelligence, threads of light pulsing through crystalline filaments as unseen advisors transmitted projections into her mind. "The hearing is suspended," she announced, her voice traveling through the chamber's architecture like a controlled current. "The evaluation continues." The words did not carry anger. They carried weight. The terraces responded with a low harmonic tone, a cultural signal of compliance. Ethan lowered his hands fully to his sides. He did not know whether to feel relieved or more exposed. Lyra turned toward him, the faint blue glow beneath her skin steady now rather than flaring. Up close, he could see subtle patterns beneath the surface of her arms, delicate lines of bioluminescence that pulsed in time. With her breathing, she studied him not as a royal assessing an asset, but as someone confirming a choice. "You should be escorted to the diplomatic wing," she said quietly. Her voice, no longer amplified, carried a softness meant only for him. "You are not a prisoner." Ethan glanced at the vast terraces, then back at her. "That depends on your definition," he replied. It was not sarcasm. It was caution. A faint curve touched the corner of her mouth. Almost a smile, though it vanished quickly under the gaze of the court. Royal guards approached, their armor refracting moonlight into pale spectrums across the crystal floor. They did not seize him. They walked beside him. The difference was small, but it mattered. As Ethan stepped down from the platform, he felt the scale of the chamber more sharply than before. The floor stretched nearly 100 yards in every direction, polished so precisely that it mirrored the twin moons above. Each footstep echoed softly, a reminder that he was no longer invisible maintenance staff moving through background corridors. Every movement was observed. Lyra descended beside him, matching his pace. 3 feet apart, close enough to signal unity, far enough to respect decorum. The queen watched them cross the concourse without intervening. Around her, members of the High Council shifted in controlled patterns of light, transmitting silent dissent or cautious intrigue. Ethan sensed that the true debate had only begun. Not about romance, not about scandal, about precedent. In the outer sectors, alliances depended on hierarchy remaining unquestioned. If a princess could elevate a human technician based on integrity alone, then the entire logic of inherited power trembled by a fraction of an inch. And sometimes, a fraction was enough. As they reached the arched corridor leading toward the diplomatic wing, the ambient temperature rose slightly, from 58 degrees to a more temperate 65. A subtle gesture of hospitality. Lyra slowed just before passing through the threshold. For a brief second, shielded from the full view of the terraces, she allowed herself to look at him fully. "They will test you again," she said. Ethan met her gaze, steady. "Then I will keep fixing what is broken." The corridor lights brightened ahead of them, and behind, the Empire continued to glow, uncertain whether it had just avoided a fracture or invited one. The diplomatic wing felt quieter then. The concourse, but the silence here was sharper, engineered rather than ceremonial. The corridor walls curved in seamless arcs of translucent crystal, faint currents of light traveling through them like slow breathing. Ethan walked beside Lyra at an even pace, aware of the subtle shift in air pressure as security fields recalibrated around them. 65 degrees. Controlled. Intentional. He could hear the soft hum of concealed systems hidden behind flawless architecture, the kind of infrastructure he would have admired under different circumstances. This section was built after the third expansion, Lyra said, her voice low but steady. It is designed for negotiation. Ethan glanced at the vaulted ceiling rising nearly 40 feet overhead. Feels more like observation, he replied. She did not disagree. Ahead, a circular chamber opened, its floor inlaid with concentric rings of pale light. At the center stood a single transparent table, waist-high, projecting faint data streams that scrolled in elegant alien script. No chairs. No restraints. No guards inside the room. The door sealed softly behind them with a magnetic whisper. The isolation was immediate. Ethan exhaled slowly. So this is the next test. Lyra moved to the center ring and rested her fingertips lightly on the table's surface. The light responded to her touch, brightening in recognition. The council will observe remotely, she said. They will analyze posture, vocal tone, biochemical signals. They are searching for instability. Ethan stepped onto the inner ring opposite her. The floor adjusted to his weight, recalibrating balance. He felt it in the soles of his boots. And what are you searching for? He asked. For a moment, the only sound was the faint electric pulse beneath the floor. Lyra looked at him fully. No court watching from visible tiers now. Only unseen algorithms and distant minds. Confirmation, she said. That I was correct. Ethan nodded once. He appreciated the honesty. The table shifted, projecting a holographic model of interstellar trade routes, thin lines connecting systems across 12 sectors. Several lines glowed unstable red. Certain members of the council believe humanity is inefficient, Lyra explained. Emotion-driven. Unpredictable. Ethan studied the projection. Unpredictable does not mean unreliable, he said. He pointed to a red corridor line flickering near the outer rim. That route fails because it depends on a single supply chain node. There is no redundancy. That is not emotion. That is poor design. The table responded, magnifying the section he indicated. Data streams accelerated, recalculating probabilities. Lyra watched the model adjust in real time as alternative routes formed in soft blue arcs. You see structural weakness, she observed. I see it because I fix structural weakness for a living, Ethan answered. On a station, on a system, it is the same principle. You distribute load. You build trust into the framework. The chamber lighting shifted subtly, responding to a spike in external analysis. Somewhere beyond the walls, council members were recalculating their assumptions. Lyra's bioluminescence brightened just slightly, not from emotion alone, but from validation. They expected you to defend yourself, she said quietly. You are defending the Empire instead. Ethan met her gaze across the glowing rings. If I am standing in it, he replied, I would rather it not collapse. The holographic trade routes stabilized from red to gold. The chamber grew still. Outside, unseen observers adjusted their metrics. Inside, beneath 40 feet of curved crystal and silent scrutiny, a mechanic from Earth demonstrated something the Empire had not quantified properly. Not rebellion, not ambition, contribution. And for the first time since entering the palace, the test did not feel like survival. It felt like possibility. The holographic routes settled into steady gold lines, and for a moment the chamber felt almost warm, as if approval itself carried temperature. Ethan let his hand fall back to his side, resisting the urge to wipe his palms on his work pants. He was used to solving problems with a wrench and a diagnostic tablet, not under the scrutiny of an empire measuring his pulse from behind invisible walls. The concentric rings beneath his boots emitted a soft chime, acknowledging the recalculated stability across the 12 sectors. Lyra watched the shifting data with quiet intensity, her bioluminescent patterns smoothing into calm gradients of blue. They are adjusting their projections, she said. Economic volatility has decreased by 3.7%. Ethan gave a small nod. 3.7% is the difference between strain and sustainability in most systems, he replied. It means you have margin. The word lingered in the air. Margin. Space to breathe. Beyond the sealed doors, the council processed that concept not as emotion but as measurable advantage. A new projection rose from the center of the table, this time displaying cultural exchange indices between the Valari Empire and Earth. The human metrics flickered with annotations: volatile, adaptive, cooperative under mutual interest. Ethan read the translated text and felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Humanity reduced to variables. Lyra traced one of the lines with her fingertip, and the display magnified footage from an orbital trade station. Human engineers working beside Valari technicians. Shared schematics. Shared tools. They believe humans align only when incentivized, she said quietly. Ethan studied the image of grease smudges on a familiar style of station bulkhead. Everyone aligns when incentivized, he answered. The question is what you call incentive. For some, it is power. For some, it is survival. For some, it is doing the job right because someone else depends on it. The chamber lighting dimmed slightly, focusing illumination on the projection as if highlighting the exchange. Lyra looked at him, not as a princess testing a subject, but as a student evaluating a principle. And what incentivizes you? She asked. Ethan considered the question carefully. He thought of the coolant manifold he had repaired, of the unseen workers who would have suffered if it failed, of the quiet satisfaction in systems running smoothly. Reliability, he said at last. If someone trusts me to keep something working, that is enough. The words were simple. The biometric sensors around the room confirmed their steadiness. No spike in deception. No tremor of ambition. Outside the chamber, probability models shifted again. Lyra stepped closer, reducing the space between them to less than 2 feet. The glow beneath her skin intensified, reflecting faintly in Ethan's eyes. If you were bound to this empire, she said softly, your reliability would extend beyond machinery. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. Then the empire would need to decide whether it values reliability from a human. The chamber fell still. The projection slowly dissolved, replaced by a single emblem of the Valari crest hovering above the table. Its light pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Somewhere beyond crystal walls and algorithmic scrutiny, a threshold had been crossed. Not a declaration of union. Not yet. But an acknowledgement that the equation had changed. And in that quiet diplomatic chamber, beneath 40 feet of curved transparency and unseen judgment, 2 worlds were no longer analyzing each other as threats. They were beginning, cautiously, to calculate partnership. The Valari crest hovered between them, its light steady and deliberate, when the chamber temperature shifted by 2 degrees, and the floor beneath Ethan's boots vibrated with a deeper frequency. It was subtle, almost polite, but it did not belong to the controlled calibration of diplomacy. Lyra felt it too. The glow beneath her skin sharpened from calm blue to alert silver. That is not council review, she said quietly. The doors remained sealed, yet the holographic table flickered, the crest distorting for half a second before stabilizing again. Ethan looked down at the concentric rings under his feet. The inner ring pulsed out of sequence. You have a systems override, he said. Someone is injecting an external command. The walls responded with faint lines of red light threading through the crystal, thin as veins beneath glass. No alarm sounded. That was what unsettled him most. Whatever was happening had authorization. Lyra moved to the edge of the chamber, placing her palm against the curved wall. Data cascaded across the surface in luminous script. Her breathing remained steady, but her voice tightened by a fraction. A council faction has initiated a contingency protocol, she said. They are redirecting energy from outer defense arrays toward the palace grid. Ethan processed the implication instantly. To frame instability, he said. If the grid falters while I am under review, it proves their argument that human involvement introduces risk. Lyra's eyes met his. There was no fear there, only realization. The floor pulsed again, stronger this time, enough to send a faint tremor through the table projection. Ethan stepped toward the center console. Show me the palace grid architecture, he said. For a split second, Lyra hesitated. Accessing that level of infrastructure with a human present would be political defiance. The tremor came again, slightly stronger. She made her choice. The chamber filled with a three-dimensional model of the palace power lattice, lines of energy branching like neural pathways across nearly a square mile of crystalline structure. Several nodes flashed unstable amber. They are overloading secondary regulators, Ethan observed. If those fail, the palace will experience cascading brownouts. Not catastrophic, but visible. Visible weakness. Visible justification. He moved closer to the projection, studying the flow. Your system assumes uniform distribution, he continued. It does not account for adaptive rerouting under stress. Lyra stepped beside him. Explain. Ethan traced a path through the hologram, outlining an alternate loop between three outer nodes and a thermal reservoir beneath the diplomatic wing. You can siphon excess load. Here, he said, but it requires manual authorization. The automated system will reject it as inefficient. The chamber lights flickered once, briefly dimming before returning to full intensity. Somewhere beyond the walls, observers were watching energy metrics spike. Lyra closed her eyes for one measured breath. Interfacing with the palace network through the living crown she carried in genetic inheritance even without wearing it. Manual authorization requires sovereign override, she said. Ethan did not look at her. Then override it. Another tremor rippled through the floor, stronger now, a reminder that hesitation favored those who had triggered the contingency. Lyra's bioluminescence flared bright silver, reflecting in the crystal walls. If I do this, she said softly, it confirms that I trust your assessment over theirs. Ethan met her gaze, steady and grounded. If you do not, he replied, they confirm that I was the weakness. For one suspended second, the future of perception across 12 sectors balanced on a decision measured in watts and pride. Then Lyra placed her hand against the projection and spoke a command in her native tongue. The holographic lattice shifted. Energy rerouted in a smooth arc through the thermal reservoir. The amber nodes faded back to gold. The tremors ceased. Silence returned, thick and undeniable. Somewhere in the palace, a faction's quiet attempt to manufacture instability dissolved without spectacle. In the diplomatic chamber, beneath 40 feet of curved crystal and unseen scrutiny, the empire did not fracture. It adapted. And the adaptation had followed the guidance of a human mechanic who refused to let a system fail simply because someone wanted it to. The tremors were gone, but the silence that followed carried a different weight. Not uncertainty now, but exposure. The holographic lattice hovered in calm gold above the table, energy flowing in balanced arcs through the rerouted channels. Ethan let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. The chamber lights stabilized at a steady glow, no flicker, no strain. Lyra lowered her hand from the projection, the silver flare beneath her skin gradually softening back to blue. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Beyond the curved crystal walls, the council had witnessed everything. The unauthorized contingency, the attempted destabilization, the sovereign override, and the human solution that had prevented visible failure. A new signal pulsed through the chamber, deeper than the previous alerts, resonant and unmistakable. The sealed doors unlatched with a smooth hydraulic whisper and parted to reveal Queen Seraphine standing alone in the corridor. She had not brought guards. She did not need them. Her presence filled the threshold with quiet authority. The living crown above her brow shimmered with layered light, reflecting streams of data still flowing through her mind. She stepped inside, the doors closing behind her without sound. The temperature seemed to recalibrate around her, settling into a precise equilibrium. Her gaze moved first to the stabilized projection, then to Lyra, and finally to Ethan. The palace grid reports optimal balance, she said, her voice calm, almost contemplative. The attempted strain has been neutralized. She did not name the faction responsible. She did not need to. Lyra stood straight, not defensive, not apologetic. The instability was manufactured, she said, to validate prejudice. The Queen's eyes flickered briefly with a brightness that suggested acknowledgement rather than surprise. She turned to Ethan. You identified the fault within 9 seconds, she observed. You recommended a solution that required sovereign override. You did not hesitate. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, aware of the enormity of the scrutiny, yet refusing to shrink beneath it. A system under stress does not wait for politics, he said. If you see the weak point, you reinforce it. The Queen studied him for a long moment. The chamber remained still, as if the architecture itself understood that a decision was forming. Several council members intended to attribute the disturbance to your presence, she said at last. Instead, your presence prevented their narrative. Lyra's glow intensified faintly, not triumph, but vindication. The Queen took one step closer, reducing the distance between ruler and human to less than 4 feet. Do you comprehend, she asked Ethan, that by intervening, you have altered internal power dynamics within this empire? Ethan met her gaze steadily. I did not intervene to alter power, he replied. I intervened because something was about to fail. The answer lingered in the air, simple and unadorned. The Queen's crown dimmed slightly, processing complete. Intent, she said quietly, is a variable our models undervalue. She turned to Lyra. Your discernment was not misplaced. Then she faced Ethan once more. The Empire will convene a full assembly at first light cycle. You will stand beside my daughter when the decision is announced. It was not a request. It was recognition. The holographic crest reappeared above the table, brighter now, its light steady and unfractured. Outside the chamber, across nearly a square mile of crystalline palace, energy flowed smoothly through reinforced channels. Inside, beneath 40 feet of transparent architecture and the gaze of a queen who measured centuries, a mechanic from Earth stood not as a weakness exposed, but as a stability proven. First light cycle arrived without spectacle. No alarms. No tremors. Just the slow illumination of twin moons fading behind the crystalline dome as a pale star rose over the palace horizon. Ethan Cole stood once more at the center of the grand concourse, the same 100-yard expanse of polished crystal beneath his boots, but this time his wrists were unbound and his hands rested calmly at his sides. The terraces were full again, thousands of Valari arranged in luminous tiers, their bioluminescent skin casting soft gradients of blue and gold that rippled like a living sky. Beside him, 3 feet to his right, stood Princess Lyra Valeth. Her posture was steady, shoulders aligned, chin lifted not in defiance but in certainty. She did not look at the crowd. She looked forward. Ahead of them, Queen Seraphine descended the crystal steps with measured grace, the living crown upon her brow refracting the newborn starlight into quiet halos. The air held at a precise 60 degrees, cool and deliberate. When she reached the final step, the hum of the palace system softened, as if the structure itself leaned in to listen. The Empire has reviewed the events of the previous cycle. The Queen began, her voice resonating through architecture rather than volume. An internal contingency sought to manufacture instability. It failed. A subtle shift moved across the terraces, light patterns adjusting in acknowledgement. The Queen continued. The failure was not due to suppression. It was due to adaptation. She turned slightly, her gaze resting on Ethan. A human identified structural strain within 9 seconds and proposed reinforcement without regard for political consequence. Ethan felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes, yet his breathing remained even. He had fixed a system. That was all. Intent has been evaluated, the Queen said. Integrity has been measured. The Empire recognizes strength not only in dominance, but in reliability. Lyra's glow brightened, a soft silver woven through blue. The Queen stepped forward until she stood only a few feet from them. Therefore, I affirm. The princess's selection, she declared. Not as indulgence, not as rebellion, but as strategic alliance. A low harmonic resonance spread across the concourse, not shock this time, but acceptance recalibrating in real time. Ethan did not smile. He did not bow. He simply stood, steady as the reinforced grid beneath the palace floor. Lyra turned her head slightly toward him, and for the first time since the ordeal began, the tension eased from her shoulders. No dramatic gesture followed. No triumphant display. The Queen lifted one hand, and a thin band of light formed briefly in the air between Ethan and Lyra, linking their positions in a simple arc before dissolving into the ambient glow. A symbol, nothing more. The terraces settled into calm gradients of blue. Energy flowed smoothly through every visible node of the palace lattice. Above them, The rising star reflected in the dome, and then in Lyra's eyes. Ethan saw his own reflection there, small but unafraid. In a galaxy that had measured power in fleets and hierarchies, the recalibration had begun with a mechanic who fixed what was about to fail. He was not crowned. He was not transformed. He was simply acknowledged. And beneath the vast crystalline sky, that was enough.